All right, we're starting with Unit 5 in this video. This comes out of Chapter 11 of the textbook. We're in the first section, which is called Designing a Study. Everything in Unit 5 is about data and drawing conclusions from data and just using statistical methods for looking at information. The content standards that we're going to be looking at in this lesson are the first one, to recognize the purposes of and the differences among sample surveys, experiments, and observational studies, and explain how randomization relates to each of those. The second one is use data from a randomized experiment to compare two treatments, use simulations to decide if differences between parameters are significant. And the mathematical practice that we're going to be looking at is constructing a viable argument and critiquing the reasoning of others. Pretty much everything in Unit 5 is about information that's going to also be covered in the statistics, the probability and statistics class or the AP statistics class. However, in those classes, they go into more detail into these methods. So we're really just going to cover the surface, cover the basics of the beginnings of statistics in this unit. So while this stuff might seem difficult on the surface, we're really just covering the basics. It's not that hard. So let's get into some terminology that we're going to be looking at in the lesson today. We've got three terms here. A survey. So in a survey, data is collected from responses given by members of a population regarding their characteristics or their behaviors or their opinions. So this is the key thing here, is that a survey covers a population, covers all the people in some population. In an experiment, the sample is divided into two groups. You have an experimental group that is given a change, they undergo a change, or they're given a treatment. And you have a control group that does not undergo the change, or that gets a placebo. Placebo is meanings like a fake treatment, where they think it's real, but the people running the experiment know that it's not real. Then the effect on the experimental group is compared to the control group. And thirdly, we have an observational study, which is where members of a sample are measured or observed without being affected by the study. So the key here is that this is a sample from a population. It's not an entire population like a survey. And also, there is no experimental group. You're just looking at people to see how they react in their natural environment. You, as the person running the experiment, are not doing anything to anyone in the study. All right, our first example, we're going to be looking at how to classify study types. Part A says we need to determine whether the situation describes a survey, an experiment, or an observational study. Then we're going to identify the sample and suggest a population from which it may have been selected. So the scenario is a retro movie theater wants to determine what genre of movies to play during the next year. They plan to poll 50 random area residents and ask them what their favorite movies are. So this is a survey because the data are collected from participants' responses to the poll. The sample is the 50 people, area residents, that are polled, and the population is all of the area residents. So the reason this is a survey is there's no treatment that's being done to anyone, so it's not an experiment. There's no treatment and control group. It's also not an observational study because you're not watching what people do. You are asking them something. If they're polling them, they're asking them something. That's a survey. Part B, same instructions. The scenario is a driving school wants to determine the main issue drivers face while taking the driving test. They watch and record 30 random people taking the test. The key here is that they are watching and recording people who are already doing something. They're not doing anything to them. That makes it an observational study. The sample would be the 30 people that they're looking at, and the population could be all the people, all the drivers that take the driving test. Okay, we've got a check your progress problem. Go ahead and pause the video, read through the scenario, and pick which kind of study this is. You'll see the answer on the next screen. Okay, our answer to this one is choice B. This is an experiment. They're giving something, a new entree, to people and observing reactions. So there's a new entree, and then obviously there will be the old entrees, the original entrees, which means it's an experiment because there's something new that's being introduced, and they're going to compare it to whatever their old menu was. Example 2, part A, says we need to determine whether the situation calls for a survey, an experiment, or an observational study. Explain your reasoning. So again, this is very similar to what we looked at in example 1. The scenario is video games. A gaming company plans to test whether a new controller is preferable to the old one. A group of teams will be observed while using the controllers to see which one they use the most. So they're comparing a new controller to an old controller. But they are not doing anything to them. They just want to look and see what happens. That makes this an observational study. They're just observing the teams who use the new controller. They're not forcing one group of teams to use the new controller and one group of teams to use the old controller. They're just looking at kids who do use the new one versus those who use the old one. This should probably say part B. But the second scenario is restaurants. It says a restaurant wants to conduct an online study in which they will ask customers whether they were satisfied with their dining experience. The key here is they're asking customers something. They're not doing anything to them. That makes this a survey because they're asking people their opinion about something. Check your progress. We've got a scenario here. Go ahead, pause the video, read through the scenario, figure out which kind of test, which kind of study is the most appropriate here. We'll see the answer on the next screen. Our answer for check your progress number 2 is C. This is an experiment. A research firm wants to test the effects of a new health drink. So if they're going to test the effects of a new drink, they're going to see the new drink versus the old health drink, and then see how the new drink is affecting people's health. That makes this an experiment. Example 3. We're going to look and see if there is bias in the survey questions. Bias means that one option is preferred over another, or one option is meant to be picked over another option. So the directions say that we need to determine whether the survey question is biased or unbiased. If it's biased, explain your reasoning. And part A says, what is your favorite type of music? This is an unbiased question. 1, because it's clearly stated, and 2, because it doesn't encourage a certain response. For example, a biased way to say this question would be, what is a better type of music than hip-hop? So if you phrase it that way, you are implying hip-hop is the best kind, and what could possibly be better? And you could replace hip-hop with any kind of music. You could say, what is a better kind of music than rock music? Or what's a better kind of music than pop music? The key is, in those statements, you are pushing the person who responds towards thinking about one thing over anything else. And that makes there be bias in the question. Part B. The question is, do you think that poisons such as pesticides should be sprayed on crops? So this question is biased. The reasoning being the wording that they choose to use here. They use the word poison, and as soon as people think poison, they think, oh, that's something bad. And most people are going to think, do I want poison? Do I want something bad put on crops, which are plants that I'm going to eventually be eating or that maybe animals will be eating? No, I don't want poison on them. And so it's going to affect the way that they answer the question, meaning that there is bias presented in the question. Even though pesticides might be good for crops because they would keep harmful insects or animals from eating the crops, thus allowing the farmers to harvest the crops, even though that might happen, the fact that they use the word poison in here biases the people who are answering the question into thinking, oh, something bad is going on. We've got a check your progress scenario. Again, is there bias or is there no bias in the question? Read through the options and pick your answer, and then we'll see the answer on the next screen. This one is D. There's bias and it encourages a certain response. The reason it encourages a certain response is because it calls the Super Bowl the ultimate sporting event, as if there's nothing better anywhere in sports. And it assumes that people like American football the best out of every possible sport. So it's encouraging a certain response. It's preferring one thing over anything else. Example 4, we're going to look at how to design a survey on a real-world problem. The scenario says a community college wants to determine whether college-bound students from local high schools would be interested in taking a class at the college. State the objective of the survey. What do they want to do? Suggest a population. Who should they ask? And write 2 unbiased survey questions. Okay, so the first thing we're going to look at is the objective of the survey. What do they want to know? They want to determine whether the college-bound students from local high schools would be interested in taking a class at the college. So you're just rephrasing what is given in the example. The population, if there are determining college-bound students from local high schools, the population would be all the local high school students. And then 2 possible survey questions. Then you don't have to have these. You could have anything that are unbiased. But their 2 examples are you planning on attending college after high school? And would you be interested in taking a course at the community college during high school? These 2 questions don't have any bias. They don't assume that people are planning on attending college. They don't assume that you're going into the workforce. They don't assume any option. There's no bias in that first question. And then, would you be interested does not push anyone towards taking that course at the community college during high school. It doesn't push them away from it. It doesn't push them towards it or away for it. It's just up in the air. We've got a check your progress problem for this. Go ahead and pause the video, read through the answer choices, and we'll see the answer on the screen. Okay, our answer here is B. Would it be beneficial to do this? And how often would you use the recreation sign? Example 5. We're going to go ahead and pause the video, pick up with this question in the next video because we're running out of time for recording.